Hey, and thanks for listening. This is Conversations, the True Voice Media podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Gibbard. Let's get started. This is episode 19 of True Voice Media Conversations. This is our podcast, and now that we're 19, we're just about out of our teenage years and ready for the 20s. So for episode 19, I brought back the guest from episode 18 because Corey Padveen is just so damn interesting that I had to have him come back for more. So Corey Padveen, for those that didn't listen to the last episode, why don't you tell them to go listen to the first episode and then come back to this one?
Okay, everyone, go listen to the first episode and then come back to this one, please.
Awesome. So Corey is the Global Director of Social Business Strategy for T2 International, which is a marketing agency up in Canada, Montreal. Am I right? Montreal. And Corey was nice enough to come on to the show again to continue our discussion, talking a lot about making data-driven marketing decisions, but today I'd like to actually start by expanding a little bit more. You are the Global Director of Social Business Strategy. Let's talk a little bit about social business, because that's something that is obviously very near and dear to our heart as the social business agency. We are very interested in talking about more than just marketing. I'm wondering if you've had any sort of success, or if you've seen any developments in companies' open-mindedness towards the concept of social business and not just looking at social media marketing. What sort of things have you seen over the past, year that leads you to believe that social business is something that's here to actually stay, and that we should kind of continue down this path respectively, your agency and our agency?
Sure. The last year, it's funny that you mentioned the last year, because in the last year, the transition out of a fear and lack of understanding has sort of moved into, I need to do this for a lot of brands, whether it's SMBs or global brands. The move has been really more towards, how do I do this properly? And when we talk about social business, you and I have discussed this in the past, the idea of social business is not social media marketing. I mean, there are countless people who identify themselves as social media marketers. And a friend of mine she runs the, actually you met her, Alexandra in Amsterdam.
Oh, yeah.
She mentioned something. She and I were speaking at an event in Kuwait back in April, and she mentioned something to me which I thought was hugely insightful. Social media is a tool. It's a communications tool. It's a communications tool like email. It's a communications tool like your website. It's vastly superior to a lot of those because of some of the capabilities that exist. But it is, in essence, a tool. And unlike any tool we've used in the past, people have sort of singled social media out as an area that requires its own department, its own expertise, its own separate wing of a company, an appendage unto itself, as opposed to being integrated into the business as a whole. And this move that we've seen in the last year has really been towards brands immersing themselves entirely in the idea of leveraging social wherever it's applicable, as opposed to having your, say, sales team, your executive team, your marketing team, and then your social media team. Social business is the idea of using social in an effort to achieve business goals, short and long term. And the way to you could do that internally using communications tools like Chatter, Salesforce Chatter, or Microsoft's Yammer, or one of these tools to facilitate cross-departmental communication, or you can be using these outward communication tools like Facebook, like Twitter, LinkedIn, Yelp, all these outward tools to communicate as you would with anything else, again, in order to achieve business goals in a shorter, more efficient way. And now that brands are starting to recognize that and understand that social business isn't this term social media marketing, which people sort of I feel as though it got overused and people developed this idea of social media marketing. You mean posting to Facebook? I mean, how many times have you heard that? I'm guessing plenty.
Yeah, entirely too many. In fact, the majority of the calls that we were fielding a year and a half, 2 years ago were really about increasing the number of likes we get on Facebook and a number of other really asinine sort of behaviors and running people's Twitter accounts. And I think what we've seen is there is a little bit more of a wider acceptance about using it to accomplish business goals, which it's something I'm particularly happy about. But to your point that it's just a set of tools, if we look at it like a tool like email, or we look at a tool like, telephones, which are, probably, as far as I know, never had their own departments. I mean, IT kind of oversaw email and I guess phones back in the day. Who would even know? But social media having its own department, I'm wondering, do you think that there's going to come a point where all of these singled out professions around social media or even around social business and strategy will become absorbed into existing business functions? Or is this a new area that, the companies like mine and yours are kind of pioneering and that will stick around for the long term? What's your thought on the longevity of this as a career focus?
I think that the important thing to think is that as an agency, the ability to develop an expertise in a niche, and marketing agencies, advertising agencies, we've all been around for a very long time. Well, a very long time, not really in retrospect. I'm sorry, I watch Cosmos now, so a long time means nothing. I have these existential crises in the shower in the morning thinking, what's the point?
Fantastic.
So the idea of, marketing advertising agencies, these are, yes, they're departments, but developing a niche expertise in how to execute strategies that leverage advertising. Advertising is, again, it's a communications tool. Marketing is a number of communications tools, all working, again, towards achieving business goals. Having an expertise in social, having a division or a full company with an expertise in this niche of leveraging social for business is something that does have that longevity aspect to it, because you're not simply, like you said, it's not just about posting to Facebook or tweeting on behalf of a brand. If we have a standing rule, that if a brand isn't willing to take ownership of their social, if they're not willing to really adopt it and run it, then we find it very difficult to find a way to work with them, simply because brands need to be willing to take ownership of themselves on these platforms and use these platforms internally with our help as experts in that field to really help them leverage these platforms and use them to build their businesses, again, short and long term.
So then I think probably in your business as much as ours, part of our job is education. We provide a lot of education and training to those clients. And much like you, when I started True Voice Media, we made it very clear that we would not be the ones to run and manage any of our clients' accounts. And for the very same reasons that you just outlined, that if you're not willing to take ownership of it, you're not going to have a very successful future in social, mainly because you are handing over the keys to the voice of your brand to someone outside of your company. And should that external person shut down their company, get hit by a bus, or just decide they don't want to work with you anymore, you're now not even you don't even have ownership or participation in the community that was built. And that's something I was always opposed to. So, as we educate and as we make sure that these clients better understand what they're doing, and, let's take the case of a full-scale social business initiative where, HR becomes socially integrated and they start working with the marketing department to tell the story of the culture of the company, and they use social as a recruiting tool to find the right candidates and explore them, et cetera. The marketing department is using social to better tell their message and engage their fans where they are. They're using advertising opportunities on social and on search. The sales department is creating sales resources and using social sites to increase their close rate and better connect and move people through the funnel. You've got operations that's using social internally. So let's say that all of these things work, and we've now educated and gotten this company to the point where every department understands how social fits. Do you think that then puts that company in the position where they pretty much no longer need a dedicated social person because they've been able to integrate it throughout the organization? And if we then blow that out and say, what if every company did that? Would social then just sort of get absorbed? Do you think social business would get absorbed into the other functions that have always existed, and it simply becomes just a tool that is in a company?
Well, let's look at this in terms of the social landscape as something separate. This week alone, Twitter and Facebook both came out with their press releases announcing the the upcoming buy button text that they're going to be running. Google acquired Twitch. Foursquare relaunched and rebranded itself as a Yelp-type review network. And then on all the smaller scales, you have things like Airbnb coming out with their new logo and then having a back-to-back crisis with some squatter staying in a house in California, which went viral. You have so much taking place that even if the practices themselves become, I guess, commonplace within an industry, the idea of being up to date, being able to completely change and adjust your strategy is going to need to evolve. I mean, for decades, the idea of media buying, the idea of media planning, these things were common practice, and the largest brands in the world had their in-house teams and worked with outside agencies for the media buying and for some of the creative. But it was always, it was black and white. It was steps A to Z with no tangents between those letters. Now, with the vastly changing landscape, the fact that Google updates its algorithm over 500 times a year, which is 1.5 times per day, the fact that it's next to impossible to keep up with regular updates of how features on social are changing, and people who are popping in and not knowing what to do, and people who think that things are working one way. I mean, I just read an article from Marie Smith last week where she was talking about how she, with her massive Facebook audience, used to regularly get well over 6 figures of impressions every time she posted something. Now she's lucky if she gets over 20,000. And these kinds of changes require people to be regularly holding their ears to the ground and listening for what's changing, because those changes will affect the way businesses conduct their day-to-day operations on these kinds of media.
That does make you make a really good point there, because actually, if you think about it, how much have phones changed since Alexander Graham Bell? How much has email changed since You've Got Mail? It's pretty much been the same in terms of the protocols, how people use them. Pretty much everything about those platforms has remained relatively the same by comparison to when you look at what's happening in social, where if you look at Facebook 3 years ago, it's a different beast than it is today. Same thing with Twitter. And there was no, Swarm app. There was no this, that, and the other thing. It's moving so quickly that I think you raise a good point that it is it is a tool set that is adapting and evolving much more quickly than previous tool sets. So when we compare it to the telephone, that's not probably the best comparison, mainly because of the speed at which it's adapting. It's more like a virus that adapts or something. It's got to be, there's got to be a better metaphor for the social tool set than telephone or email. So we have to figure out what that is.
Right, and a lot of these changes that you're seeing when it comes to the landscape, a lot of people don't recall the fact that within the last 6 years, Facebook has tried, and I actually wrote an article about this on Tuesday, it was, on my personal blog, talking about the potential for the Facebook buy button to actually work, because the last 2 times that Facebook has tried to roll out e-commerce type features, they failed. It was Facebook credits and the Facebook gift shop, which then became Facebook gifts. But the gift shop also, which came out in 2012, was rebranded, or which came out in 2010, was rebranded as gifts in 2012, which are still off-site. Now they're trying to integrate payment processing within Facebook, and now it might actually work. But before, Facebook credits, which launched in 2008, it was like going out and buying iTunes cards, where you had to go buy Facebook credits and swap the credits out for US dollars on your Facebook account, and you can go out and buy things with those credits. It just didn't work.
I credit their relationship with Microsoft for that idea, because Microsoft points and that whole if you use Xbox, that is. I always thought that was such a silly idea to buy tokens or buy credits or anything. It's like, I already have a credit card. We're already using a monetary system. Why are we playing in this whole new arena where we have credits or tokens or whatever the hell we want to call it? So I credit their relationship with Microsoft for that. One of the things that I would worry about if I was Facebook about putting together any sort of internal payment system is that I think that while people use Facebook, and I think there's obviously you can see see that engagement on Facebook has risen dramatically, and time on site, and they're doing a lot of things right. I think one area where they probably haven't moved as much as they would like to is in the area of trust. And I don't think, even though the majority of people will use Facebook, I don't know how many of them actually trust Facebook or their motives. So do you think that might be a barrier to their mobile payment?
I think it would be a huge barrier. I think that the two things that we have to consider, and you talk about trust. I know that you've had Julio Viscovich on the podcast.
Yep.
And Julio is a big fan of the Edelman Trust Barometer.
Yep.
And I mean, when you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, you could see that when it comes to trust, people tend to put very large brands further and further down the list behind. The number one rank is either academic or field experts, individual experts.
Yep, or people like me.
Or people like me, exactly. So, these brands find their way further and further down. And now all of a sudden, Facebook, which has dealt with, I was talking to a lawyer who is considered, if you type in social media lawyer into Google, he's the first result. His LinkedIn profile is the first result. He's really built up this reputation as the go-to for the legal implications of social. And what he was explaining to me was that, what was it, about a month or 2 months ago when Snapchat was handed down this 20-year probation because they had lied in their terms and conditions that they weren't storing all this data. The data of the images. They were saying it was disappearing, but it wasn't actually disappearing, so they got this 20-year probation and are now living with that. But what he was telling me was that a lot of people don't realize Facebook and Twitter both received those probations as well, because they were also storing and sharing information that they claimed they weren't storing and sharing. Facebook has also dealt with the issue of running tests and running studies without informing people, just using their information.
Yep.
Essentially, because people can't see what's being done with all of the information they're putting in there, and people, we talked about this on the last podcast when I was on, the amount of information people are handing you. It's like giving the entire world, or at least 1.2 billion people, a 10,000 question survey that they're filling out in great detail.
Yep.
And people are handing this information off, but they don't, even though they're handing it off, they don't really know what Facebook's doing with it. So how comfortable are you going to be now putting in information that connects not only to your bank account, but to your social insurance number and to your credit history and how much money you're making and all sorts of things like that? It becomes much more personal when you start involving finances into the mix.
Yeah, one of the things that I was talking about the social ads, the mobile payment system with a couple friends of mine that are in that space, and one of the questions they asked was, what do you think? Do you think that Facebook would look into your spending history and start targeting ads based upon what you've already purchased or what your interests clearly are, and how do you feel about that? And, the first thing that I thought was, well, you'd have to give them access to do that, but if you think about the prompts that come up anytime you install an app or you give an app access to Facebook, how hard would that be to actually get people just click, oh, yeah, just sort of like the terms and conditions. So then we get to a point where, nothing is really sacred. There's nothing that's hidden from Facebook, and they've already proven themselves to be poor stewards of our information, as we are simply the product and not actually their customers. So I would agree. I think that there's a huge trust barrier there, but I still think that we're moving in that direction. I agree with you. I think, there's a very good chance that if they keep hammering away at this, they'll eventually get people to use these systems. And beyond that, I think if you look at the track record of Facebook, is that the more they mess with their user base, the less people seem to really notice. We just kind of like, oh, Facebook did something again? Oh, okay, no big deal.
Well, that's it. What was it? When Facebook rolled out the news feed.
Yep.
I remember I was with, this was back in 2008 when they rolled out the news, 2007 or 2008 when they rolled out the news feed. And this was when Facebook had just come out, had really just started picking up a lot of steam. People were starting to use it on a much more regular basis. But originally it was all students, and I remember I was with a group of students, and they were saying that they were just mortified, and they were protesting Facebook, and everybody boycott Facebook. And now you have these huge overhauls where Facebook changes the idea of a 3-pronged algorithm to a 100,000-pronged algorithm, saying, here's how we're going to start feeding you information based on what we deem to be most relevant based on your history, and people don't budge.
Yep.
The entire structure changes, and the people who are most upset about it don't even bother making a Facebook page anymore. And that was the go-to. Yeah. And one of the things that I mentioned in the article that I wrote is that the reason why Facebook is most likely going to succeed this go-round with the Facebook buy button is because people have lowered expectations. The billion people using the network expect this kind of thing to come about, and they expect Facebook to transition into e-commerce and to start competing with Amazon. I mean, they launched Graph Search, which didn't work out as well as they had hoped. And after launching Graphs, I mean, yes, they weren't able to compete with Google on that field, but they're beating Google when it comes to ad dollars, and mobile ad dollars, and the reason why mobile ad spend percentages, and the reason why is because they insist if you want to access our billion-person database, you have to pay for it.
Yep.
And whereas 2 years ago, only 4% of registered businesses were actually advertising on Facebook and spending money to be there. Now that number goes up and up and up every single day because Facebook is basically saying, we've reached a critical mass and you're not going to stop us from moving ahead with this juggernaut, so you might as well just get on board. And people have started to concede to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at, I've been a big fan of Google Plus since it came out, and I know that I'm in many ways in the minority there, and I think part of that is because
100% of people on this phone call, so that's pretty good.
Woohoo!
I'm a fan.
But I mean, even as much as that's the truth, that we both like it. I mean, realistically, how much time do you spend on Facebook versus Google Plus? I mean, you're probably spending a lot more time, and especially mobilely, you're probably spending more time on Facebook than you are on Google Plus. Part of that is the network effect. More of my friends and more engagement happens on Facebook than it does on Google Plus, and that's going to be a problem for Google moving forward in terms of that mobile component of their ad revenue. While I still search using Google on my phone, the time spent there is very quick. It's utility. It's, I need this thing. There it is. Cool. I got it. Whereas on Facebook, I'm browsing through and I'm seeing, oh, look at that. There's an app I could install, or, any number of things. And while I'm one of the most vehemently anti-advertising people you'll meet, I, for myself personally, not as a consultant, as a consultant, I see that it's the right thing sometimes, but personally, I hate ads. But it's obvious why they're killing it, and that is because they actually pivoted to make mobile more of a priority, and they noticed how many people were using it, and they're clearly winning there. And I even have to give them kudos for that as one of Facebook's biggest critics. But while we're on the subject of social ads and Facebook, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I want to get back to some of the work that you're doing, specifically with paid advertising. I think it was on the last podcast that you had mentioned that you rarely take on, actually I think it was on this one, where you mentioned that you rarely take on clients anymore for social that don't have some sort of a budget for ads. And I think that that's probably very smart, especially if Facebook is one of the places you're going to be using. It's very difficult to get any sort of reach without that. But outside of Facebook, but also outside of Facebook, where do you see some good opportunities for using paid promotion in the social realm? Things like Reddit or Stumble on Paid Discovery or even Twitter ads. Pinterest ads aren't out yet as far as I know that you can use, or Instagram ads. It's like a $100,000 minimum buy-in. What sort of things are you doing with your clients, and what sort of results have you seen as a result of the changing and morphing social landscape for ads?
Well, when it comes to, and you're right about, I think it was this podcast too, that when it comes to clients that we're working with and campaigns and projects that we're taking on, there is a, not necessarily for all campaigns, but there is going to be a significant weight added to whether or not a client is willing to make the investment in social ads. And obviously, the pay-to-play system on Facebook is here to stay. That's the way Facebook works. I mean, you're not going to, Google still has the beauty of finding your way to the top of Google results simply by putting in the time and effort and not having to pay for your ad to pop up on top. There's also the added benefit of Facebook being far more affordable than Google, although ad spends have increased, what was it in their quarterly, 124% year over year, I think this year. Mm-hmm. So it's becoming more expensive, but it's still affordable to be advertising on social. In terms of where brands should be allocating those ad dollars, again, it's all going to depend on your goals, on what you're trying to do. We've worked with Pinterest promoted pins, and those will work if you know your audience, if you know what content works with that audience, and if you're running a specific initiative that requires you to leverage that kind of rich media. Or if you're, on something like Instagram, don't go fooling yourself thinking that Instagram is ever going to become something that drives considerable web traffic. Unless Instagram completely revamps their entire system, their entire premise, people aren't going to start using Instagram to click off of the app and onto a website. Instagram is going to be, you talk about $100,000 ad spend. That's because the Instagram ad platform is really designed for brands that have that household name and that can leverage that name with an Instagram campaign to increase brand awareness, brand loyalty, to promote a new initiative or a new product line, for example. The small mom and pop shop, unless they really want to showcase something that they did to the world, they're not really going to get much out of running an Instagram campaign or making that massive investment to get it.
I'm actually going to push back on you on that one because recently I've come across a couple examples of very small local companies that are using Instagram very, very effectively. And I think there's actually a very big opportunity to target people in local markets. Think about a local boutique or a retailer that is small, local. They make crafts of some sort, or they sell, quirky antique furniture or something like that. They could use Instagram, and I've actually seen companies in Philadelphia that have done this, where they post kind of the one item deal of the day. They've only got one of these items. They post it with a full description, a couple different pictures of it, kind of using Pick Stitch or Diptyque, and they put this whole thing together, describe it, and then they say, here's the price, and they put to buy, call this number. And I think the ability to target that ad, if that were a post, and to be able to target that geographically to a demographic based upon age and gender, they'd be able to actually sell more products and probably at a very low cost per click. But if it's $100,000 to get in on an Instagram ad, that precludes all of these little mom and pops that are using Instagram to sell their, $10 to $150 items. It precludes them from being able to participate in that. So if it were me looking at the Instagram ad platform, which again, I hate that there's even ads on Instagram, I would say that I'm less interested in seeing the big names because, quite frankly, I don't give a shit about Mercedes and seeing a picture of a sunset in a Mercedes-Benz. I'll go to Pinterest and I'll start a board for cars if I want to see that sort of stuff. But I'd love to see something nearby that's offering me a deal or that has something incredibly unique that might relate to my interests. What are your thoughts on that? Does that open your eyes to a new possibility?
Oh, I totally agree with you. When I'm talking about the value in Instagram ads, the reason why I think that a local campaign like that is hugely beneficial. I think that if you can target a local audience, that would be great. If you're a local business and you have something like that, an initiative or a particular product. But the thing about Instagram is that, yes, the value in, you look at something like Pinterest. Pinterest touts the referral traffic that if you post a product to Pinterest, people are more than happy to click on it, visit your website, and buy it right there. Pinterest's average spend per referral purchase is higher than any other social network. On Instagram, I've watched people sitting next to me who open up Instagram while they're sitting on the train or sitting at the desk or sitting and having lunch. They open up Instagram and they just go through their list, liking every picture, close Instagram, and go about their day. Mm-hmm. The idea of using Instagram as a resource for products or resource for prospective purchases or deals hasn't really hit the ground running yet. And that goes to what you had just said about Instagram hasn't opened up their ad platform to the average user. It's really open. It's really only for the Mercedes-Benz or the Michael Kors that can afford to spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on advertising on a specific platform. Should
they come out with the buy now button?
Instagram?
Yeah.
I think if Instagram had a buy now button, that would change everything.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, Pinterest is experimenting with that now as well as Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest is, there are talks of experimenting with that, but Twitter, Facebook are going to be experimenting with that. I know that if I was sitting on Instagram, there's no shortage now. Granted, my tastes on Instagram run towards high-end watches and yachts, so I don't know if I'd hit the buy now on...
Mine are ladies that do fitness. I find that it's very enjoyable.
And I don't know if that would go over so well if there was a buy now button on it.
Maybe in Amsterdam.
But I think that's a great idea. The idea of a buy now button on Instagram, that would change the landscape. I think that's definitely onto something, and I hope somebody from Instagram listens in, because you're onto something there, for sure.
We should send that to them. But, so pivoting away from Instagram, Facebook, and you also just gave me a great idea just through this conversation, which I'll explain to you later on. But let's talk about Reddit and StumbleUpon. Have you done any campaigns with your clients where you're using some of these more fringe, very niche networks? I mean, Facebook is the network of the masses, and Reddit is a very specific niche network, primarily male, generally between the ages of 18 and generally 30, I would say.
Yeah.
And a little bit more tech-centric, definitely eccentric in their tastes, all sorts of all over the place sort of stuff. But I saw an article saying that ad results through Reddit can be extremely, extremely effective and can be really good results. Have you had any experience with either Reddit, StumbleUpon, or any of the other sort of fringe networks?
When it comes to limited experience, only insofar as it's like you said, it's a fringe network, and when you come up to a brand and say, here's what we are thinking of doing, they think of social bookmarking, they think of these kinds of content curating websites as, well, I'll just post something there and that's what it'll do. Mm-hmm. People are much more willing to spend money on the website that has a case study section than they are on a website that is hugely niche targeted and has millions of pieces of content, even though it has as much content, actually maybe a little less content than, say, a Facebook or a Twitter. They're still willing to spend the money on a network where they can look at results compared to a network that they don't really understand. I'll give you an example. Storytime. I know that we talked about that. So once upon a time, there was a client of ours who we were discussing the opportunities that existed with Reddit, and we had talked about the thing about Reddit that people have to keep in mind is that the success with Reddit generally is it's all about timing, because so much of Reddit is topical. And if you're unable to pick up steam at a certain point in time, it's likely not going to happen for you. But the thing about Reddit is that because it's so topical and because there is so much being piled on top of everything else, you really do have to have that killer piece of content, and you have to know exactly who's going to respond to it. And we talked about this last time I was on. Understanding your audience, understanding who the audience is that you're trying to target, understanding what the response rates are going to look like, and in a case like Reddit, understanding the subreddit where it'll pick up traction. The research in a Reddit campaign or in a StumbleUpon campaign, these are important things to consider simply because you really need to understand the audience that you're targeting. That's going to be a crucial component of a successful campaign.
So let me ask you this. You're a data guy. Would you say that if you were to look at, let's say you looked at your Facebook Insights, and let's say you have 1,000 fans, and you notice that there's a demographic breakdown there that shows that 60% of your audience are males between the ages of 18 and 30, would you then look at that data and say, you know what, this audience may also be on Reddit? Is that the sort of thing where you might make the decision to go and check out something like that? Or, let's say you see that it's highly female. Let's say you see it's between the ages of 18 and 30 female. Do you then say, maybe Pinterest is a good place for us to start spending more of our marketing dollars? Is that one of the things that you would do with a client, is start to look at data from one place and then apply it as a way to look at another potential avenue? It's
certainly an area to look at as a test market. Mm-hmm. What you're saying is true. You really have to build. You have to cater to the network, not have the network's audience cater to you. Because if I own a company that sells muscle cars, mm-hmm. I'm not going to have the same traction on Pinterest as I will on Instagram. simply because of demographics. You have a much more even breakdown, or much more even when you have as big of a majority of women using Pinterest compared to a not equal, but quite a few more men using, quite a few larger ratio of men using Instagram. You do have a likelihood of a greater opportunity to showcase your product on that photo sharing network as opposed to Pinterest. And so that's why I say, you have to cater to the demographics that are already in place. But, and I mentioned this last time we spoke, every network has its own personality. For example, if you have a Facebook page, our Facebook page is very corporate. Our Pinterest boards have pictures of dogs and puppies, and we've made a theme that, yes, in addition to marketing and infographics and things of that nature, we also have boards for cute animals. And that's because that's the theme that we've decided to run with, is marketing and something we like. And that's something that you have to cater to, because you really have to think in terms of, how will my audience respond to this piece of content? How will the audience on Pinterest? Yes, my audience on Facebook might respond well to this type of content on Facebook. And it might be women aged 18 to 35. But if I take this content and bring it to Pinterest, will that same audience be interested in it? Because it's not necessarily the same women. These women might not necessarily have the say 24-year-old woman on Facebook engaging with my content. It's not necessarily the same 24-year-old woman on Pinterest engaging with content there. And her taste might run differently on each one of these networks. So yes, it's a good idea to start with that type of a demographic in mind, to go in there with that test audience. But you might find through running a campaign or running an initiative or program that you may have been way off base, and you have to restructure either your content or your targeting methods.
Yeah. All right. That makes sense, man. That totally makes sense. I want to pivot and ask you one kind of final thing, because we've really covered the gamut over the course of these two episodes, from social business, data-driven marketing decisions, social ads, the trust barometer. We've covered the gamut. So you and I are both, pretty up on what's happening out in the world, and we're probably consuming similar sources of information. But a question I often like to ask guests, especially ones that are as intelligent and well-read and well-versed in different subjects as you, is, what are you most excited about right now? What are you looking out in the future? And it kind of gives you goosebumps to think about. Is it wearables? Is it, the collaborative economy? Is, what's the thing that's got you really jazzed about the next big thing? Because obviously, as you and I both know, it's not always about the next big thing, but really doing the right thing with what you've got. But for people that are always looking out into the horizon, I like to get the answer to this question. So what are you most excited about right now? What's out there that you're really jazzed?
I would have to say, without a doubt in my mind, that the Internet of Things is, I could not be more excited about just seeing the entire world connect. There is who is it? It's not, maybe it's Cisco. Or maybe it's Philips. There's a video online about how one of these Internet of Things companies, one of these major pioneers in the whole concept of the Internet of Things, and for those listening who aren't familiar with what the idea of the Internet of Things is, it's connecting your world. So basically, the Internet of Things could be something like connecting your smartphone to your alarm system in your home, and also to your stove and the lighting system, which also connects to your car. It's basically putting everything into connection with itself. So the interconnection of everything, whether it's physical or cloud-based. I think that there was a video about how they're trying to turn Barcelona into the first city that is completely connected. And the ideas that they're talking about with smart roads that tell you how far you are from an open parking spot on your smartphone, which connects to your car. City lights that turn off when sensors don't detect people are walking there to save the city energy costs. Bus terminals that show you on a map based on GPS where the bus is.
Like Uber.
Exactly. The idea of making smart cities and actually making the world a more efficient place I find that very exciting. And I mean, you know, I'm a data guy, so efficiency is really something I enjoy. But I think the Internet of Things is really, that's what I'm most excited for moving forward.
Awesome. Corey, man, thanks so much for coming on for the second episode of Conversations. I got to have you back all the time. I love talking with you about stuff. You're such a smart dude. And I look forward to seeing you in Dallas, Boston, and San Fran. And I'm sure we'll see each other again next year at more conferences and things like that. Good luck with everything you're working on. Before you go, as always, please tell people where they can go and be social with you and connect with you and learn more about what you're doing and learn about some of the things that they can learn from you.
Definitely. Again, thank you very much. It was just as much fun the second time as it was the first, so that's definitely a good thing.
Nice.
As far as connecting with me, feel free to reach out to me if you want to read my blog. My personal blog is hosted at CoreyPadveen.com, Corey with an E, Padveen, Padveen. You can read our corporate blog, T2, T the letter 2, the number 2, marketinginternational.com. And you could feel free to reach out to me on any one of the networks where I have an account. The easiest way to list those is probably to tell you to go to about.me/Corey Padveen, where I have all of my networks listed in one place. Again, Jeff, thanks so much. This was a ton of fun.
Awesome, man.
Definitely a good way to spend my Friday, so thanks.
Awesome, man. My pleasure. Well, for all those out there listening, thank you for listening. Please come back if you haven't given us a rating yet. I hope this is the episode that has inspired you to go and give us 5 stars on iTunes. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. Please do take care. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Conversations. Be sure to go over to iTunes or Stitcher and give us a rating. Tell us what you love about the show, what you hate about the show. And we hope you come back for our next episode. Take care.